Welcome back to our continued look at how to teach entrepreneurship. Today we're going to look at chapters 2 and 3, which will enable us to complete section 1. So let's get started. Chapter 2 starts with a very specific quote that's designed to stimulate some different thinking. Environment pierces to the very heart of life. If we probe to the beginnings of life, it is there no less intimately dependent on environment than it is in its completest manifestations. We never find and never can conceive life pure, unenvironed. The purpose for choosing this particular quote, which is from a very favourite author of mine, MacIver, is that everything that we do is about an interrelationship. As Dewey noted, this unavoidable interaction between the inner world and outer world, and then within that outer world, the other people that we're interacting with. And so this chapter is trying to really stimulate within you a greater appreciation for the nature of learning environments. We're calling it an activity environment, where this activity of entrepreneurship education is taking place. I bring in a sort of a context to sort of stimulate this thinking by using the development of the railways as an exemplar. When the railways were first brought into America, they were viewed as an idea. Then they became a construction industry, and then they became a conduit for the removal of, people and products and services and all sorts of things. And there's an analogy here that I think makes really neat sense, and that is thinking about entrepreneurship education as an idea, then thinking about it as a construction process, as we build up schools, or we bring in professors, and we do all of these various different things. But at some point, it has to become the conduit for education. And that's a big part of that challenge, is being actually able to understand the nature of the environment that would be required for this educational process to occur. Rule 6 sort of is born from the nature of this discussion in the chapter, and it's about community. Entrepreneurship can and does occur independently of formal education curriculums. Education can aid the development of entrepreneurial attributes and intentions. Therefore, entrepreneurship education curriculum should incorporate those natural factors external to the traditional formal education process that would most likely increase the rate of entrepreneurship occurring in our communities. It's a very, very big point here, because we can't simply think of an activity system as being something that we would otherwise call a classroom or a lecture theatre. Entrepreneurship education is much broader than that in terms of the setting within which it happens. Which brings us to Rule 7. Use candour. We can't know everything our individual students need to know to be able to complete their journeys. It is our responsibility to ensure we do everything to help our students on their journeys. Therefore, we must encourage and assist our students to locate others with more appropriate expertise directly related to their journeys. And so now we're thinking about this activity system, which isn't about rooms and walls and ceilings. It's about the nature of a journey and the type of interaction the student's going to need to have in order to complete that journey. So I introduced this notion of activity theory, which has been around for quite some time, since the 30s, and made quite famous in the educational context by Ingerstrom since the late 80s and 90s. And we think about 6 types of dimensions that occur for any activity, whether you're riding a bike or cooking a cake. In our context, education. So we've got rules, we've got roles, we've got tasks, we've got individuals, we've got tools, and we've got community structures that relate to culture. If we can understand the nature of these 6 interrelated dimensions of an activity, we can identify where there are contradictions. How do a certain set of rules, which might be imposed at a faculty or a university level, prevent the development of the right tools in order to achieve the desired outcomes? What particular roles must people be playing in order to support the individuals who are trying to achieve particular outcomes? So we've got a whole range, a whole different way of being able to think through the nature of this activity. And we'll discuss this much deeper further in the book, but it's really introduced now to try and sort of put some parameters around the focus areas of an activity environment. Which brings us through to Rule 8. All aspects of the curriculum required to support entrepreneurship education cannot be known in advance. Students of entrepreneurship education cannot be totally independent in their desire to become capable of self-negotiated action. Therefore, a mutual process of constructive responsibility and resource alignment must occur between entrepreneurship educators and their students. Now, where most educators will be familiar with this notion of constructive alignment. What are the desirable learning outcomes, and therefore what would be the most appropriate learning activities, and therefore how would we best assess that? And if we can align the learning outcomes to the learning activities and the required methods of assessment, we will have achieved constructive alignment. But in entrepreneurship education, we need to do more than that. We need to try and work out where is there an alignment in terms of the responsibility. Once we've got our students leaving the classroom and using other forms of expertise and engaging with other sources, we need to try and make sure that we all understand who's responsible for the learning that's occurring. So as we develop authentic entrepreneurship education curriculum, we also need to ensure there's an alignment between an understanding of who is responsible for what at each stage of the process. Likewise, we need to understand where different resources will be used in different ways by different students for different purposes. To what extent are we in agreement about the nature of those resources, who's responsible for getting them, and so forth. So, in summary, there can be no doubt that your ability to understand the complexities of your activity environment are critically important. Activity theory is introduced here to enable the ideas in the following chapters to be considered in this context. There are many factors that will derail your best plans at developing and supporting good entrepreneurship education. Through activity theory, you can embrace such challenges and develop strategies to remove any such contradictions. Regardless of how difficult your obstacles may be, activity theory enables you to develop strategies to overcome them. There are, of course, no guarantees about eventual success. Moving on to Chapter 3, and I've got a cracking quote to start this chapter, one that really I just love to engage with. Among all men, whether of the upper or lower orders, the differences are eternal and irreconcilable. Between one individual and another, born under absolutely the same circumstances, one man is made of agate, another of oak. One is slate, another of clay. The education of the first is polishing, of the second seasoning, of the third rendering, of the fourth moulding. It is of no use to season the agate. It is vain to try and polish the slate. But both are fitted by the qualities they possess for the services in which they may be honoured. So Ruskin points out the importance of appreciating the individuality of our students. And this is the whole focus of Chapter 3. That our students don't come in one size, that they are very much individuals, and that our challenge is to be able to recognise that. Which brings us to rule number 9, 3 questions, which lead on from Ruskin. Every student we encounter is headed somewhere. The purpose of education is to help students on this journey. Therefore, make sure you know where they are going, and what they need to know to make this journey possible. Rule 10, respect the individual. Our students will not need to engage with the same content or experiences at the same time. Our students will not start or finish together vis-a-vis the pursuit of their aspirations. Therefore, provide your students with enough options to ensure they can travel forward together whilst also being able to construct individual learning pathways. Rule 11, meddling with minds. Students don't always engage deeply with teacher-centered sage on the stage approaches. Students don't always engage deeply with student-centered guide on the side approaches. Therefore, whatever methods you use, just make sure you get inside their heads. Make sure you meddle with their minds. Now the chapter goes on, having sort of built on the small discussions which are surrounding those rules, to talk about 4 different areas: surfacing diversity, understanding the needs, individualized learning, and student and educator alignment. Surfacing of diversity I discuss with reference to the Student Diversity Index that I developed back in 2011, and this is included obviously at the back of the book. I'm always more than happy to share any of the resources that would align with it, spreadsheets and the like. You'd only need to contact me. Understanding needs draws on the work of Ralph Tyler, where we're actually thinking about the difference when we're setting and building a curriculum. Is the curriculum designed to address general needs? That is something we think every student should benefit from exposure to? Or does the curriculum accommodate immediate needs? Something that's different in each student, because they've all got different immediate needs, right? The individualized learning side of things is a natural extension to Tyler's ideas, and that allows us to bring in learning as a personal progress. And that's very much building on the notion of Dewey, Lindemann, Piaget, those types of people who saw, and Rogers, who saw education as a progressive process of becoming a person. And chapter also then has this notion of student and educator alignment, and this really just picks up on Rule 8, really, which we saw in Chapter 2, where we're talking about the need to try and make sure that we have an alignment between the responsibilities of the educator and student and the resource processes that they would go through. I introduced this book not based on any empirical evidence, but just on my own experiences and observations over the year, knowing that I can't be all things to all people. And I find these different types of students in my classes, and I talk about each of these types of students. The soloist, the one who just wants to go it alone. The intrigued student, the theorist, the uninvolved, the activist, the entrepreneur, the lost student, and the groupie. And you can sort of see that educators, that I could be viewed by the student as being inspiring, detailed, boring, or enabling. I get all of those sorts of feedbacks, and I'm sure you do too, right? The challenge, of course, is that the soloist might be very happy for me to have given detailed instructions on how they can go their own way, but they may also find some of my other qualities quite boring. The intrigued person might be captured by an inspiring talk that I give, but might be very bored by the detail. The theorist could be bored by the inspiring, but excited by the detail. The uninvolved could be just simply not very excited to go anywhere, so doesn't really want me to enable a journey, but might be happy to listen to an interesting story, and so on and so on. So this chapter helps you sort of trying to understand there's a lot of different types of students sitting in front of us, and it's very hard for us to satisfy all of their needs. So, in summary, developing knowledge of your students' individual needs opens the door for you to consider assessment as learning through the deployment of reflective tools that enable you to more intimately witness the learning of each student. It's important to remember that we cannot gain all the knowledge of our students in advance of meeting them. Much of it will come over time, depending on how we choose to interact with them. And even when we attempt to do everything right, we will encounter recalcitrant students who fail to engage. I look forward to talking to you soon when we look at chapters 4 and 5. So there you go. That's the end of section 1 Next time we're going to move on to section 2, which is thinking about the rules of the game. Look forward to chatting to you soon.